So welcome to this Steltex Invoicing webinar. We're going to present a solution for JD Edwards. Today we have our two presenters, Daniel Smith, Managing Director for Steltex Asia Pacific, and Mark Barham, which is the Steltex Product Specialist. Welcome everyone and enjoy.
Thanks, Andrea. So Daniel speaking, and firstly, welcome everyone to what I hope is an informative and exciting session on e-invoicing for Oracle JD Edwards. I'm joined today by my colleague, Mark Barham, who will be taking us through a live demonstration. So thank you for attending. Obviously, lots of familiar faces on familiar names on the call, so appreciative. Just some housekeeping. There is a Q&A tab up in the Teams setting. Feel free to pop any questions you have that pop up during the session into that chat, and we'll do our best to either address them there and then, or we've got plenty of time at the end of the webinar. And at the back end of this, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording as well. So thank you for your participation. Let's jump into it. Just a little bit of, I suppose, background initially in terms of who Steltex is for the uninitiated. So Steltex as an organisation is a leading Oracle practice globally. Been operating for over 20 years, so 23 years. Consultants and customers in circa 36 countries and around 800 customers, and obviously do a lot of work in the Asia Pacific region with our process automation solutions. Many of the people on the call today are already leveraging one or many of those solutions, which we'll cover off today. I suppose in the context of the content that we're looking at today around e-invoicing, without introducing too many terminology or too many standards too early, the Peppol framework, which is what Australia and New Zealand has adopted, both the ATO and MB, actually originated out of Europe. So from a Steltex perspective, with headquarters in Netherlands, we've had 10 years of delivering Peppol solutions for customers across Europe. And obviously, as Australia and New Zealand looks to adopt these solutions and protocols, we're well positioned to help customers and clients on that journey of enabling e-invoicing for both accounts payable and accounts receivable, which will be the topic for today. So from a portfolio perspective, we're focusing in on the e-invoicing solution for AR and AP today from a Steltex product perspective, but just to make you aware that we have a broad range of products to help organisations automate their business processes from a JD Edwards perspective. So that includes mobility solutions, warehouse management and automation solutions, and general business process automation solutions, through to single sign-on solutions for JD Edwards, incorporating multi-factor authentication, which is our transparent logon solution, our drop zone solution, which enables mass data update into JDE with a single drag and drop from Excel into JDE, and as well as a number of our other accelerator solutions from a project accelerator and a version management configuration perspective. But today the focus is going to be on the e-invoicing solution for both AR and AP. From an industry perspective, we've got a breadth of customers covering a broad range of industries. And again, from an e-invoicing perspective, that's kind of relevant because we know that invoicing, the whole procure to pay process or source to pay process, differs quite significantly from, for example, an engineering construction user who has to deal with subcontractors, project progress claims, etc., through to organisations perhaps in the local government who purely focus on the accounts payable processes because the accounts receivable is managed by a third-party system. So we've got a broad range of customers that have adopted these solutions. And just to show you some of the logos of the organisations we deal with across various industries. So let's get into the e-invoicing and start to introduce some of the concepts and how it applies to JDE and what are the steps required to enable e-invoicing in a JDE environment. So firstly, what is e-invoicing? And I'll cover off what it isn't. I suppose at the core of e-invoicing, it is the transfer or the digital exchange of invoices between two ERP or finance systems, regardless of the type or brand or vendor that is providing that finance system. So whether it's Oracle, Microsoft, etc., but it's the digital exchange of invoices between those two organisations. And we'll run through some examples shortly. So we're not talking about the exchange of PDFs. We're not talking about EDI. We're talking about a standard which has been adopted here in Australia and New Zealand called the Peppol standard and the Peppol framework, which is a predefined, pre-formatted, pre-legislated format for an invoice, which we'll again show some examples of shortly. So in the truest sense of the word, it's the digital exchange of invoices between organisations. And it's a global standard which has been adopted, as I mentioned earlier, initially in Europe, and it was born out of Europe and is slowly but surely being rolled out across Asia Pacific, the US, North America, and other countries across Europe, UK, etc. Very topical at the moment in Australia and New Zealand, particularly with a number of organisations, predominantly government agencies, mandating or having been mandated that they need to adopt the e-invoicing. So a number of government agencies at a federal and state perspective, particularly here in Australia, have been mandated to adopt e-invoicing in the sense that when they send invoices and when they receive invoices, they need to be capable of doing that with an e-invoicing format. And many of the organisations on the call today deal a lot with government agencies, and there are a number of benefits of adopting e-invoicing, which we've covered off in previous sessions. But just to recap, some of the benefits include faster payment terms. So if you're e-invoicing enabled and you're working with a state or federal government agency, you'll get 5-day turnaround times on invoice payments, which is a huge boost to working capital when you compare it to the alternative. Because the e-invoicing or the exchange of e-invoicing information is essentially machine to machine or touchless, there's less chance of human intervention and therefore is more secure from an accounts payable processing perspective. And because, again, it is machine to machine, the reduced cost of processing the invoices can have significant benefits from a cost perspective, both on an AR and an AP side for organisations. So just to summarise what e-invoicing is. Now, in relation to what you traditionally do, and I know many organisations on the call would be familiar with the standard process of receiving an invoice, and some individuals on the call or some organisations on the call have got various levels of AP automation, and we'll distinguish between AP automation and e-invoicing shortly. But if you look at a traditional value chain from an invoicing perspective, pretty manual in the sense that the supplier will create an invoice, they'll typically email it to you. You'll receive the email, and if you don't have any elements of AP automation, you're keying that into your ERP system, JDE, manually rekeying that a lot of the time, and then creating the matching process for accounts payable processing. So where e-invoicing differs is a supplier will send across a secure network, which we'll talk about shortly in terms of the Peppol network, a predefined payload, which is the e-invoicing. So it's a very structured, predetermined, pre-legislated format, which you can see on the right-hand side. That is transferred over a secure network and consumed or ingested into your environment, which triggers the AP automation, which triggers the matching process and the touchless processing from receiving that invoice into the payment of that specific invoice. And that's the demonstration we're going to give shortly. So I suppose the key call out here is that it's not a PDF, it's not an OCR screen scrape of a PDF, it's not an EDI, it's a predefined, pre-formatted format you can see on the right-hand side, which is the Peppol legislative standard for both AP and AR invoices. And it's also good to know that that payload or that e-invoice contains a lot of information that would otherwise not be on a PDF invoice. So it's richer in the composition of the data, which is something you can take advantage of if you're looking at incorporating that data into the receiving, into the ERP, for example. And that is the touchless processing. And we'll give you some examples of that, how it traverses the network and how it manifests itself in JDE shortly. So just in reinforcing that and making sure that we're all clear as to what an e-invoice is and where the Australian New Zealand market is heading from an e-invoicing from a Peppol standard perspective. Obviously, invoicing has been around for, well, hundreds, if not thousands of years. So we're talking about paper-based invoices. We're talking about PDF-based invoices, which are introduced. We're talking about OCR technology, which is now 15 plus years old, which a number of organisations on the call would be leveraging today, which is the character recognition on a PDF and the ability to extract that and put that into systems like JDE. We're talking about the next generation of invoices, which is the eInvoice, so the Peppol certified legislated framework. And we've been helping many organisations. So although it's relatively new in the Australian New Zealand market, we've been working internationally, and we've also the only JD Edwards solution registered with both the ATO and MB in New Zealand to support JD Edwards e-invoicing processing. And we're the only e-invoicing solution globally for JD Edwards in other markets as well. So I'm just going to run through an example just to conceptualize the process and talk to the different components of the solution. Because in theory, it's a very simple process, but there are a number of safeguards and components of the end-to-end solution we need to be aware of in the context of activating it for your JDE environment. So this is a Peppol diagram. It's called the four-corner diagram, which underpins the Peppol framework. On the left-hand side, you have a supplier, and on the right-hand side, you have the buyer. So for the purposes of this example, bear with me, your company name here, you're acting as a buyer. So you've procured or purchased some goods. You're now anticipating the receipt of an invoice. I'm going to step through what that would look like in a e-invoicing environment, and then we'll look at how we manage some of the exceptions, because we know it's not always a straightforward process end to end. On the left-hand side, we've got the supplier, and that company's called Acme Corporation. So you can thank my childhood for many Roadrunner episodes for the name of the supplier. But what we're going to see here is the exchange of an e-invoice, which is originated from the supplier, which goes through the Peppol network through to your company name as the buyer. So the first thing, assuming the services and goods have been received, and we'll cover that off in the AP process shortly, but the supplier is going to generate an e-invoice. Now, the assumption here is that they're operating on any ERP platform, but they have the capacity to generate an e-invoice from their ERP. So the first thing that is going to do is traverse and connect to the access point on the Peppol network, which is corner 2. So an e-invoice is going to get sent to the Peppol network. So this is a new concept and a new thing for many organizations, the concept of interacting with the network. So the Peppol network is there to securely transfer the invoicing information, but also securely route it from one organization to the other. And there is a requirement for anyone adopting e-invoicing to sign up or subscribe to the Peppol network. And that's a service that Steltex provides that we'll cover off shortly. So first step is that the supplier is going to send an e-invoice to their access point to the Peppol network. It's then going to look at things like the ABN and other validation exercises to determine if the buyer is also part of the Peppol network and therefore able to receive an e-invoice. So it does a series of security checks and lookups, predominantly on the ABN, and it routes it to corner 3, which is your, being the buyer's access point to the Peppol network. Now, through this process, it can do a number of things such as filtering. It can look at managing exceptions if there is information in the payload which is deemed to be incorrect, missing information, etc. And we can stop the invoice at that point in time and push it back to the supplier for remediation without it ever actually hitting your ERP. So that's a benefit of somewhat abstracting some of the miscellaneous or missing data from the environment. Now, so this is at the access point. It's still not in your ERP at this point in time, but it has hit your access point. It can go through some whitelisting and that filtering that I mentioned. And then the next step in the process is to ingest that e-invoice into your ERP. So again, this is your company name. So of course you're running JDE. So we need a mechanism to be able to ingest that e-invoice into JDE. Now, that's not something that you have out of the box from a JD Edwards perspective. That's not something Oracle is providing. And that's really the special sauce on the AP side that Steltex is offering, is the ability to ingest that e-invoice, put it into JDE, and automate that accounts payable process, which again we'll see shortly. So that's the perfect world where an e-invoice transmits from in this instance, a supplier to a buyer, focusing on the AP side at the moment. We'll focus on the AR side shortly. But just to extend that slightly, we're going to step through a couple of other scenarios and really talk about what the value add that Steltex offers in terms of the solutions and offerings. So in this example here, we're still your company name. You're operating as the buyer. So this is Betty in accounts payable. She looks pretty happy. She's got the invoicing in place, so her job's a lot easier, and we'll see elements or testament to that shortly. So in a perfect world, she's received from a supplier that e-invoice on the left-hand side. It's gone through the access point, so that's joining the dots between access point providers. If we know it's the correct ABN, we know it's the correct payload. She receives an e-invoice as well as a PDF, which via the Steltex AP invoice JDE adapter is ingested into JDE and triggers the AP automation process. And we'll see a demonstration of this shortly. So that e-invoice, which was that format we showed before, now is resident or ingested into JDE and is visible in the AP module as both an e-invoice and a PDF. And we've mapped all the fields within our e-invoice to the associated voucher match fields in JDE. And again, we'll show you that shortly. So that's really the Steltex solution that enables e-invoicing for JDE on an AP perspective. Now, that's a perfect world where everyone is operating on e-invoices, maybe 3-5 years from now. But we know that a big bulk of your supply chain, as we move progressively to the adoption of e-invoicing, won't have the ability to send an e-invoice. So we need a mechanism or a method of catering for more traditional invoicing methods, such as PDF, supplier portals, EDI, etc. So what we also enable is the ability to receive non-e-invoices through the Steltex Peppol access point and convert them to an e-invoice that can get ingested in the same way that a traditional e-invoice does. So we can do that with PDFs, with other integration techniques such as VANs, EDIs, etc., or if you're using a supplier portal, which is enabled through our solution. So what that enables us to do is progressively over time deal with the non-e-invoicing suppliers whilst also dealing with the e-invoicing suppliers. And part of the service and offering we do is help you with your non-e-invoicing suppliers to onboard them to e-invoicing and understand the benefits and the process of activating it. So that bit in the middle, which is the Steltex Peppol access point, that operates as the access point to the Peppol network, but also operates as a vehicle or a mechanism to take non-e-invoices, use technologies such as machine learning for OCR recognition to take them and convert them into a format which can be ingested into JDE as if it was from an e-invoicing source in its own right. So hopefully that all makes sense, and we can apply some additional rules, data enrichment, some whitelisting and audit and validation at that particular point in time before it hits your ERP as well. So the two key points to enabling e-invoicing for operating as a buyer is the module or the extension to JDE, which is the Steltex AP invoicing JDE adapter, which we'll showcase shortly, and then a subscription to the Peppol network, which is enabled through Steltex, and that will cater for the different scenarios, the different types of invoicing that you're receiving. So that's on the AP side, and my final comment on the AP side is obviously the procurement process is key and core to how you ingest and process the invoices, whether you're using two-way, three-way matching, whether you're using freight, transportation, etc. we've catered for all of that. So ingesting the invoice is one part of it, and then the AP automation off the back of that. Once you what you do with an invoice and how you match it to your purchase orders or your non-PO transaction is catered for, and we'll cover that off shortly. So if you move to the sales side, so that's AP. So this is Sammy in sales, and he's doing what all good sales guys do. He's waiting for an order to come through, and he's having a coffee, surfing the net. He works for your company, and he's running JDE. And through the JD Edwards AR eInvoicing JD adapter, when a sale does come through, and this can be obviously from multiple subsystems in the JDE sense, whether it's sales order management, whether it's through a billing capability, etc. At the end of the day, you're going to generate an invoice. And what we offer here is the ability for that invoice to be generated in the Peppol standard e-invoicing format, as well as the traditional PDF, which is communicated from JDE through our adapter onto the network through our access point. And then we have a multitude of different delivery mechanisms depending on the capabilities of your customer to consume an e-invoice, or if they have something more traditional, which is that PDF email format. So we have a multitude of different forms of communication once we get it onto the network. I suppose key here is if you're communicating with government agencies, this is the way in which you can get some of those benefits we discussed earlier, which is faster payment terms, etc., through the interaction of submitting of an e-invoice. Now, we also know that, again, back to the industry comment at the beginning of the conversation, that different industries will have different types of invoices and invoicing processes, from progress claims, RCTIs, traditional invoices, etc. So the solution caters for all of those scenarios. I suppose I'm just showing you what a standard invoice process might be from end to end. So we've covered off both AP and AR sales. It's probably fair to my earlier comment around accounts payable. There is more complexity when you're introducing procurement, which the bulk of our customers using the solution would have. On the sales side, it's sort of simpler because it's less channels to get an invoice out, as opposed to on the inbound side with procurement coming into play. All right, the other nice thing that our solution offers is you get real-time visibility of what's happening on the network, or what's happening within your tenancy or your domain on the network. So you can see things like the number of e-invoices that have been received, the number of e-invoices you've sent, the percentage of those e-invoices versus non-e-invoices. You can start to track spend by supplier, your top suppliers, your top customers, as well as things like provenance in terms of where your suppliers are located, where are some of your goods being sourced from. So the solution comes with a rich set of analytics, which is enabled through that access point, in addition to the transactional processing, which is enabled within JDE, which we'll see shortly. All right, so I suppose to summarise what's required for your organisations, you're sitting there today on JDE 9.1 or JDE 9.2. You probably know a little bit about e-invoicing, and you're not entirely sure what are the steps required to activate it. Hopefully we've covered off a little bit of that today. But if I use the four-corner diagram for a second to depict what is actually required, then the e-invoicing solution from a Steltex perspective is required both from an AR and an AP perspective. So that's on the AR side, the ability to generate an e-invoice with that PDF we just covered off. And then on the AP side, the ability to ingest an e-invoice and kick off the AP automation process. So those two key components are required. So that's the AR adapter and the AP adapter. And then you also need a subscription or a means of signing into or authenticating to the Peppol network. And that's a subscription that we enable with the benefits around that machine learning as a service, the data validation, and the analytics that come with that subscription. And that enables you to point and direct e-invoice traffic, both inbound and outbound, to another participant in the Peppol network. And that's where the real benefits from a touchless processing come into play. So our solution, just touching on the two extensions for JDE. So we've developed that in the JDE Edwards toolset. So it's JDE code, but which doesn't require any additional infrastructure. It doesn't modify your standard code. It sits alongside accounts payable. It sits alongside procurement. It sits alongside sales to support the generation and the ingestion of e-invoices. And last point I'll make here is that, as I touched on earlier, these solutions are registered with both MB in New Zealand and ATO in Australia as registered solutions for invoicing for Australia and New Zealand. Okay, so now we're going to move into more of the demonstrable component in a JDE context. And the scenario we're going to look at here is we're going to focus again on the AP side, because that's where a lot of the complexities lie from a matching and from an end-to-end source to pay perspective. But the application is embedded, as I mentioned before, it's embedded within JDE, and we've got a number of nice features that we enable. So your organization doesn't need to invest in OCR technology. It doesn't need to have multifunction printers with all that OCR fingerprint technology enabled. We can take care of that for you through that service that we've discussed before. We incorporate things like machine learning when it comes to the matching algorithms, the distribution of GL accounts for non-PO type invoices that are inbound. We have a full audit history across the invoices that are denied access to your environment, the ones that pass through the document management of the invoices. You can see on this example that you can see an invoice, and you'll see shortly you can see an e-invoice within the application. And we've got an enhanced document viewer, which enables very succinct, quick access to the PDFs and associated documents, which we'll show in the demonstration shortly. We've got sophistication around the workflows. So when we start to talk about we've received an e-invoicing and the matching process to a purchase order that may not have been receipted, which may not have been approved in the correct sense, we've got an embedded workflow tool which has nice attributes such as the ability to hyperlink directly back into JDE, to do the GL distribution, to do the receipting, whatever the case may be, both in the application. And we'll show you some mobile applications to support those processes as well shortly. One of the questions that often comes up is, do we support both line level and header level totals, as well as GST for Australia and New Zealand? And the answer to that is yes. I think we've covered off the benefits, and this is an area we haven't really touched on, but we do help organisations with business cases and I suppose the advisory around the adoption of e-invoicing and looking at the tangible, intangible benefits associated to this. And every industry is different. Some will have a business case which is underpinned by the payment terms and the working capital benefits. Others will be it's mandated, therefore they have no choice but to adopt e-invoicing. And others it'll be around efficiencies within the AP process and looking to leapfrog some of the technology that they may already have with OCR and older technologies such as OCR and fingerprinting. All right, so we're going to get into the AP ingestion example, and we're first going to look at what a traditional process might look like, and then we're going to look at what it would look like with e-invoicing enabled. And we're going to look at the manual process. So we touched on the receiving of a PDF earlier and the manual rekeying of that PDF into JDE, the manual verification, receiving, matching of that, to a purchase order, the manual approvals that will sometimes be associated to that in terms of managing exceptions, and then ultimately ends up in AP for processing and ultimately payment. Now, if we look at what that looks like with a e-invoicing, once an e-invoice is ingested into your environment, we can then look to execute a number of automated match processes. So here's where the Steltex AP adapter comes into its own. So it can take that e-invoice and then it can execute a series of matching routines to purchase orders if we're using three-way matching. It can look at freight invoices and process those. It can look at invoices which don't have a PO but have a known GL distribution, and then purchase order, invoices that have an unknown GL distribution, how to manage those within the application. But if an invoice has been received and it sits within a tolerance range, it is essentially pre-approved and gets processed through to accounts payable for a final check before that payment can be made, because it's passed all possible links across that value chain and is indeed considered to be a touchless processing from the supplier through to your AP team, because it's gone through those checks and balances across a secure network and a secure channel. And you're really just left with managing the exceptions, which are some of the examples I gave before. And we've been able to improve that by the exception management, by enabling internal workflows and escalations in mobile devices, such that the small number of invoices that aren't passed through automatically, so aren't passed through in a touchless sense, can now be routed efficiently in a user experience which modern users of applications are used to, be it on a mobile device or through the application. And we can process that through to accounts payable, knowing that the source of the information has come from a secure channel because it's traversed the Peppol network. It's been verified on multiple steps, and it can be ingested and matched and paid reliably, and acknowledging that it's come across those various channels. So that's the e-invoicing path. And we also spoke about the fact that not only is a Steltex solution able to ingest e-invoices, we also know that for many organizations, this is a transition. You're going to have a small percentage of e-invoices up front, and then over time that's going to grow, but you need a mechanism and a capacity to deal with other invoice types, be it PDFs, being able to receive those OCR payloads and convert that with the machine learning we spoke about, being able to receive EDI format. So the solution caters for the older technology, if you will, as well as the newer technology, being the e-invoicing format. Okay, we're now going to jump into the application, and the first thing you're going to see is the Steltex e-invoicing AP workbench. So the scenario here is that we have just ingested a bunch of the invoices that have traversed the network. That can be on a batch or dynamically, so they come through as and when they're received, or we can batch them up for processing at once. And Mark's going to step us through what that workbench looks like. He'll show the invoices that have been passed through in a touchless sense. So they've passed all those checks and balances. They've got the appropriate purchase order within a tolerance, etc. And then we're going to look at managing some of the exceptions and some of the additional functionality we've enabled within the accounts payable Steltex edition. Thank you, Mark. Okay, so again, an invoice has started. If we go back to that four-corner diagram, an invoice has started at the supplier. It has traversed the network. It is an e-invoice. It's hit JDE. The Steltex AP adapter has taken that e-invoice, created automatically the voucher and the voucher map process. And this is what you see. So yeah, to date, it's been completely machine driven or system driven, no human intervention. What you can see here is that there is 20 invoices which have been ingested as part of this e-invoicing load, and the vast majority have passed the auto match process. And we've got a combination of different types of invoices here. We've got those that require a voucher match, so a PO receipt, those that require GL distribution without a purchase order, which is known, and we've got some rules that we can apply for that. Those that require GL distribution, which is unknown and need to be managed. And we've also got some freight. So we're running the transportation modules. So we've got some freight invoices that arrive. So we can cater for all of those with this. But the key point here is that the vast majority have been ingested, gone through the matching process, and deemed to be approved and can be passed to accounts payable for processing in line with the supplier payment terms, etc. Which leaves the Betty, who we introduced earlier, also known as Mark, with the challenge of managing the exceptions. So what we're going to do is we can see that one of the inbound invoices errored at the top. So again, it's the exception, not the rule. The vast majority have passed through the system. We're going to drill into this particular invoice, which is a voucher match error. And the first thing you'll see is that enhanced document viewer, which I spoke about earlier. So because we're ingesting the invoice and the PDF, we can display the PDF on essentially any screen that is appropriate. We can do that with the outbound purchase order as well, but we can also see the invoice. Okay, so this is the legislative Peppol format of an e-invoice, which has been ingested into JDE along with the PDF. It's created. The voucher and the automated voucher match process has been triggered from that, but we still have access to the invoice within the application itself. So if you did want to know what an invoice looks like, that's what the Peppol standard invoice looks like. And again, that does contain enriched data than what is typically only available on a PDF. Okay, so now this invoice has an issue. The associated purchase order for this example hasn't been receipted. So from within this Steltex AP e-invoicing workbench, we're able to initiate a workflow. So we don't have to email, we don't have to go and try and find the invoice. It's right there, we just saw it. We can initiate a workflow to, in this instance, it's the originator of the purchase order. So this is a PO that hasn't been receipted. The individual's name is Ger, and we're going to type him a nice message and say, can you please receipt and or do what you need to do with this purchase order? It's going to put that invoice on hold until that issue is remediated, whilst the other ones which we said passed are going to be passed through accounts payable for processing immediately. So that's one example how you could escalate a transaction, again, the exception rather than the rule for the ones that are passed through automatically. Now, there's a whole lot of other approval routes and rules that we have around logged vouchers and the geo distribution, how we distribute those to end users, which we won't go into today, but suffice it to say there are checks and balances for each different invoice type and the management of those invoices, with the benefit of being able to see the PDF wherever you are within the application. Okay, I think that covers off what we wanted to show. So again, just to recap, we've shown the traverse, so the invoice that has traversed the Peppol network from the supplier to the buyer. It's been ingested using the Steltex AP adapter into JDE. It's then being automated through the Steltex AP invoicing automation rules, and then we were left to manage the exceptions. And there are some nice enhancements we've made to systemize the escalation, the workflow within JDE, so you don't have to go to external application or email around PDFs and the like. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so the other capability we have that relates to both the procurement and the invoicing process from an exception management perspective is the ability to, as I mentioned before, if we need to manage those exceptions, not only distribute a workflow within JDE, we can also have those exceptions, an application which has those exceptions on a mobile device. So for example, missing receipts for purchase orders or vouchers that need the geo distribution added to them. We can enable that within your workforce such they can just get essentially an email or a notification that says they need to action this on a mobile device and really speed up the turnaround time for those exceptions that need to be managed. That handles approving, looking at notes. You can see the PDF. You can reject it with a number of different reasons associated to it. So that's the approvals. And just to round out the procurement lifecycle, because we're touching mostly on AP. Next slide, please. Yep, sorry. The procurement lifecycle. So the ability to, and we're going back to the front we're going to the front of the value chain now in terms of creation of purchase orders, getting that GL distribution correct, getting that PO correct, the approval of those purchase orders, the ability to review the attachments for the outbound POs, and then on the inbound, the ability to receipt on a mobile device as well, which in the example that we just ran through was the issue. That person hadn't received the goods. They may not have had a mobile device to do it nice and easy. We've solved that problem by giving them the ability to receive those goods or services on a mobile device in real time with these solutions. Okay, so I suppose to summarize, the solutions are there to meet the legislative requirements, but they're also there to simplify and automate the end-to-end process, be it from an AP matching perspective or an AR invoice generation perspective, and really leave your organization to deal and manage with the exceptions, acknowledging that we've got some smart tools and capability within the application to make that as simple as possible. So the exception management as simple as possible, but also the management of the end-to-end process as simple as possible. Next one, please. That covers that off. And just on to the next one. So this isn't the first webinar that we've produced. So if you're at the beginning of your journey around what is e-invoicing and how does it relate to the legislative requirements, we've got 5 videos that we've recorded previously, which go through progressive levels of detail in terms of what e-invoicing is. It also includes sessions with MB, if you're a New Zealand JD Edwards user, in terms of what the legislative requirement is there and how Steltex is helping organisations in New Zealand, as well as a detailed session with the head of e-invoicing for the ATO, where he goes through and talks about the benefits, what the market's doing in Australia around e-invoicing. So a number of very useful artifacts to digest. Again, if you're interested in more information and or on that journey of understanding, this session will also go up on that portal just to round out that sort of macro view down to what we're enabling within a JDE context. And finally, just to round out the session, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. Many of you have probably heard or seen that we launched Summer School this week. We've already had a flurry of registrations, so just continuing the theme on education and learning. If you're not aware of Summer School, it's the online and virtual training that we run in January, so January 9th and 25th, 2023. We've got a number of courses which are filling up fast around orchestrator, workflow logic extensions, etc. So I think we'll go to the next one, Mark, and see if there are any questions in the Q&A and or chat. Okay, so Matt's got the first question. So does Peppol framework get updated on a regular basis or not? So I suppose no is the short answer. There has been significant investment and journey to get it to where it is today. It has been universally adopted, and I should state that every country has a choice as to which standard they adopt. Peppol's one of several. Australia and New Zealand has adopted Peppol, and there's no significant updates that I'm aware of that would impact an implementation, and the invoice payload's been determined, the protocol for transmission's been determined and well established across Europe and other countries and regions where it's been deployed. So Laura, you've asked, will this adhere to the links to invoices that some suppliers send? So this is an example where they've sent an email and it's got a link to an invoice, like I think, for example, Xero, you can often get that. So that isn't an e-invoice, and that would form part of that other channel we spoke about, where we would manage that through the ingestion of the non-e-invoice format. We can certainly support that. I know products like Xero and MyOb do that a lot. Ironically, or funnily enough, they were one of the first adopters of e-invoicing. So both those products, which we know are popular, particularly within the subby fraternity, are e-invoicing enabled. So that might require some consultation with those suppliers to switch that from email link to an e-invoice that is delivered to you. Okay, Pete, I'm just reading your question. Can you automate the follow-up request for non-receipted purchase orders? Yeah, so that's the manual escalation process that we triggered. Yep, yeah, we can certainly automate the a standard, if you will, message that goes to the PO originator to say, look, we've understood, or it's been determined that this PO hasn't been receipted. Please receipt this. It doesn't require that manual intervention that we showed today, but it can be automated. Yeah. Well, I think I'll call that a wrap if there's no further questions. So thank you everyone for your participation. Obviously, we're more than happy to follow up with a tailored session, a tailored presentation, a bit more detail around the extensions that we have. I know we're already talking to a number of you about enabling e-invoicing in your environment. So today was really to find out a bit more. So we appreciate that. Obviously, as I said before, each industry and organisation will be different in terms of what they're trying to achieve, what solutions they have in place today around robotic process automation, OCR, and how this solution fits into that ecosystem. That's quite topical, but we've solved those problems for other organisations before. So thank you for your participation, and we'll follow up with an email with a link to this recording, and happy to answer any questions that come off the back of this. So I think, Andrea, if you're still there, we'll sign out now.
Thank you everyone for attending, and have a nice day.
Thank you.